They had already lost everything once: homes burned, churches smashed, families torn apart by the Dragonnades and the Sun King's decree. But the Huguenots who refused to convert still had one choice left: disappear into the night or die where they stood. And so, in the winter of 1687 and the spring of 1688, small groups slipped away from France through forests, across borders, to the ports of Holland. They sold what little they had left. They said their final goodbyes to parents too frail to travel, to children too young to survive the journey. They boarded Dutch East India Company ships with nothing but the clothes they wore and the Bibles hidden in their coats. What awaited them was not safety. It was 4 months of hell on water, cramped below decks with no privacy, rations that dwindled to moldy biscuits and brackish water, scurvy that turned gums black and teeth loose, fever that swept through families like fire, storms that threatened to swallow the ship's hull. At least 21 of those 2,000 souls never saw land again. Mothers buried children at sea. Husbands watched wives slip away into the night. Babies were born in the dark hold and lowered into the ocean in weighted shrouds. Yet still they prayed. Still they sang psalms in Provençal and French. Still they held fast to the faith that cost them their country. When the survivors finally staggered ashore at Table Bay in 1688, they stepped onto a frontier few Europeans had tamed, a land of scorching summers and sudden winter rains, rugged mountains and valleys that demanded every ounce of strength, and people already living there, the Khoikhoi, whose cattle grazed the same grass the newcomers now claim. It was not paradise, it was survival. And within a year, one of those survivors would pay the ultimate price. Charles Marais had crossed the ocean with his wife Catherine and their 4 young children. He planted watermelons in his new farm in Dragonnades, and on the 29th of March, 1689, a Khoikhoi man and his companions came to the farm. They asked for watermelons. Charles refused. The fruit was not yet ripe. Words turned to anger. Stones were thrown. Charles was struck. He collapsed in agony. 5 days he lingered, bleeding inside, fevers rising. No doctor was around to save him. And on the 3rd of April, 1689, Charles Marais died, the first white settler killed in South Africa. This is the story of those who chose exile over surrender, of a voyage that claimed lives before they ever reached shore, of a new world that welcomed them with hardship, misunderstanding, and sudden violence. They did not come as conquerors, they came as refugees, carrying only their faith with a stubborn hope that somewhere, somehow, they could worship God freely. And in that hope, they endured. In a world that sanitizes the cost of following Jesus, we won't. From the Roman arenas to the hidden persecutions happening today, Mrs. O and the Martyrs brings you the raw, unfiltered truth of millions who love not their life unto death. My name is Nat. Let's remember their bravery and strengthen our faith together. In part 1, we witnessed the Huguenots' fiery birth under John Calvin, the betrayal of Catherine de' Medici, and the unimaginable horrors of the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre, the martyrdom of Admiral Gaspard de Coligny, and the relentless cruelty of Louis XIV, the Sun King, whose Dragonnades and the 1685 revocation of the Edict of Nantes turned France into a prison for anyone who dared to read the Bible in their own language. The blood in the Seine, The shattered families was a permanent, filthy stain on the Sun King's glittering Versailles, built on Protestant suffering. Hundreds of thousands were forced to choose convert or die, or disappear into the night. If you haven't watched part one, I strongly recommend you pause here and watch it first. I'll link it up here. It'll make everything you're about to see far more powerful. The link is also down in the description and I've pinned it in the comment. In this video, we will explore the bravery of those who chose to disappear and began the most dangerous journey of their lives. In the immediate aftermath of the revocation, temples were demolished overnight, pastors given 15 days to convert or leave, children forcibly baptized Catholic, and immigration officially banned. The Dragonnades' ongoing terror in the south and western France was unrelenting, and many Huguenots fled to the forests in the Netherlands, forged paperwork, and said their desperate goodbye to their elderly parents. These were the same believers who had refused, under punishment of torture and death, to deny Christ. And now they were embarking on a journey to find liberty in their belief in Jesus. Many did not make it to their destination. Perhaps by divine intervention, the Dutch East India Company, also known as the VOC, sought skilled immigrants to bolster the Cape Colony at the southern tip of Africa. Founded in 1602, they were the world's first multinational joint stock company, dominating the 17th century spice trade and having quasi government powers to build forts, negotiate treaties, even to wage war if necessary. Many of the persecuted Huguenots fled to Germany, England, and the Netherlands. The Dutch offered free passage of land and farming equipment to the French refugees if they agreed to stay in the Cape for at least 5 years. About 178 families, fewer than 1,000 people, agreed to travel on 4 ships down to the Cape. They were primarily from Flanders, Saintonge, and Dauphine, with only the clothes on their back, a few personal items, and their Bibles hidden in clothing. These saints journeyed to the unknown. On the 31st of December, 1687, the first major ship, the Verschuurten, sailed from Deerslaven, Guru, Netherlands, excuse my Dutch. It was a flute ship built in 1684 for the Dutch East India Company, bound directly for Table Bay in the Cape. They encountered strong southeast winds and storm damage. There were 192 souls on board, including the Huguenots, a Dutch crew, soldiers, and other passengers. They sailed approximately 130 days, and Captain Franz Valerius was forced to anchor in Saldanha Bay, about 120 kilometers north of Table Bay. After repairs to the vessels and waiting for better weather, the ship proceeded to Table Bay, arriving safely around mid 1888. The other 3 ships followed and had a relatively safe travel. Harry Boysons, a South African born author and internationally recognized physicist, is best known for his history and research on the Huguenot refugees who migrated to the Cape Colony. He wrote an article called God Bless the Good Ship China in March 1688. A single Dutch ship named China slipped out of the Guru harbor in the Netherlands. On board were 28 Huguenot refugees, all who had fled the persecutions in France. The voyage lasted 137 days. The ship offered no privacy, no fresh food, and after about midway through the journey, illness set in. First, scurvy, a treatable disease caused by severe, prolonged vitamin C deficiency, followed by fever. 8 of the 28 Huguenots never saw land again. These souls were lost at sea, buried in weighted shrouds and lowered into the waves with whispered prayers. Among the dead were children, young mothers, and elderly parents. One of the women gave birth at sea and passed away shortly after her baby was born, and the baby passed away a few days later. On the 4th of August, 1688, 20 survivors, weak, grieving, and far from home, stepped onto the soil of Table Bay, and the hope was now they were free to worship and believe as they chose. There were no battlefield deaths, and they were not martyrs per se. However, these were slow, agonizing sacrifices made by the Huguenots simply because they refused to deny their savior, martyrs of exile. The Cape in 1688 was a remote Dutch East India refreshment station under strict Dutch rule. The growing influence of British and French, who also had strategic interest in the area, posed a danger to the Dutch that they might lay claim to the location. And in 1670, the French attacked Saldanha Bay, exposing the settlement's vulnerabilities. The Europeans were not the only people in the Cape. The Khoi, meaning real people, were indigenous to that area. They lived in large semi nomadic communities and herded cattle and sheep. Their society was devastated by Dutch colonization, resulting in land loss, enslavement, and population decline due to smallpox. The Huguenots also faced dramatic climate challenges. As most came from the south of France, they were accustomed to Mediterranean climates. Now they were confronted with rugged, Drakenstein mountains, hot, dry summers, and wet winters. And even though the ground was fertile, the valley was stony, and the French quarter, later called Franschhoek, was isolated within hundreds of kilometers from any of the other European settlements. The Huguenots also faced dangerous wildlife, the unpredictability of the rivers, and constant threats of drought. The Huguenots were scattered amongst Dutch farmers to speed assimilation. The French language was banned in churches by the 1700s. That escaped the terror of the Sun King Louis, the horrors of Catherine de' Medici, only to step into the beautiful and wild, unforgiving New World. Charles Marais was born around 1640 in or near the Le de France region. He married Catherine Tavereau, who was born around 1642, and they had four children, two boys and two girls. Before fleeing France, after the revocation of the Edict of Nantes in October 1685, the family fled to the Netherlands through Protestant networks where they registered for free passage to the Cape in exchange for 5 years of service to the VOC. They arrived safely in Table Bay in April 1688, although some records state it was the 8th of May 1688. Governor Simon van der Stel welcomed them and granted land to the Marais family in the Drakenstein Valley, which was later called Franschhoek. Charles named the farm Le Plessis Marais or Plessis Marais near the Berg River, which was fertile but frontier land adjacent to the Khoi grazing routes. At the end of 1688, Charles began clearing the land and planting crops, including watermelons. He built a simple homestead, and the family lived in basic conditions of the early settlers, with thatched dwellings, minimal tools, and a strong reliance on hunting and gardening while waiting for vines and livestock to establish themselves. On the 29th of March, 1689, as Charles was working in his gardens, a Khoi man named Dikop, also recorded as Edessa or Thickhead, and two of his companions approached Charles and demanded that he give them the unripe watermelon in his garden. Charles refused and explained to the men that they were not ready to eat. An argument ensued, and Dikop and his companions began stoning Charles in the groin and in the side with large rocks. Charles was severely injured, suffering internal bleeding, ruptured organs, and trauma to the lower abdomen. He clung to life for 5 days in agony as there was no effective medical treatment available. And on the 3rd of April, 1689, he succumbed to his injuries. In early April 1689, the first recorded post-mortem was performed by fellow Huguenot refugee Jean Pierre Duplessis, who arrived on the same ship as Charles. In April 1689, Commander Simon van der Stel reported the incident to the VOC Council of Policy. The Khoi perpetrators were pursued, and Dikop was later killed by his own people, possibly to avoid Dutch reprisals. There was no large scale retaliation against the Khoi, but the event did heighten fears among the settlers. In the aftermath, Catherine Tabarot was left a widow with four young children. She married Pierre Rousseau, another Huguenot refugee, in 1690. The farm Le Plessis Marlais passed to the descendants, and the Marais family became one of South Africa's oldest and largest Huguenot lineages. Although this event was not a martyrdom, it illustrates the Huguenot struggles and vulnerabilities, who suffered greatly for their faith. Charles is remembered as a pioneer who survived persecution in Europe and a difficult voyage to the bottom of Africa, only to die in a new land over cultural misunderstandings. The Huguenots did not just survive this journey, their faith, skills, and endurance helped shape the farming and wine industry and the very soul of South Africa. From the blood of Paris to the tears of the sea of the soil of the Cape, their story proves that true faith does not always end in glorious death. Sometimes it ends in a quiet, stubborn new beginning. Thank you so much for watching. Please click the like and subscribe button. Please comment your thoughts below on the Huguenots. God bless you. Remember, the light still shines in the darkness.